Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I'm very excited because today I'm going to be talking about a couple of my favorite things. So I guess we're just gonna get right into it. So it's no surprise to anyone that the show on Netflix, Squid Game, is incredibly popular. Back in 2021 when season 1 was released, it became a huge thing in the world. Everybody was talking about it, and season 2 was released recently and I absolutely love it just as much. I think the show has a really interesting underlying message about it, reflecting how poor people are treated in society. And aside from the overall message of the show, I just also think it was shot really well. It looks good visually, and it's genuinely an interesting show and an interesting plot line. I know some people think that season 2 fell off or was stupid, but I personally love season 2. I love seeing Gihan come back and, try and fight the games. It's a very interesting show to me. I love it, and I love it so much. I'm already so excited for season 3. And back when season 1 came out, I made a video on my channel where I was discussing how I think the characters from my favorite childhood show, Victorious, would do if they were in the Squid Game universe and if they were playing Squid Game. So I thought in honor of season 2, it would be fun to discuss how I think the Victorious characters would do if they were in this edition of Squid Game. I did want to leave a disclaimer before this video starts. I do not support Dan Schneider, first and foremost. All of the Victorious cast that I see still talks about the show fondly and, has good feelings about their show. I've seen some of them say like they love when kids still discover the show on Netflix or whatever. So I still feel comfortable sharing my love for Victorious, but we do not support that. And also, this should be an obvious statement, but this is just based on the characters of Victorious. It's fictional. Obviously I don't wish death upon anybody, but that's literally kind of the premise of Squid Game, is that people die, and this is just my honest opinion based on the show on how they would do in Squid Game, and not everybody can survive Squid Game. That's just a fact. So if you're going to be offended by the fact that I'm killing off fictional characters in a fictional situation, you should probably leave this video. Since in this season of Squid Game, we really only see the 3 games before they, try and fight the games, I'm also going to be covering what I think they would vote between each round, like if they'd vote to stay or if they'd vote to leave. Let's get started, shall we? So naturally, the first game in Squid Game is red light, green light, and I think this is honestly one of the easier games in the whole game. It's one of the most survivable, I think, because it doesn't really rely on too many special skills or anything. I mean, a little bit the trust of the people around you to not like push you or sabotage you, but all you really gotta do is freeze, I think it's especially survivable this time around because they have the warning of what happened the first game, so they know to have that extra level of caution that they wouldn't have even had the first time around. I mean, already just looking at the statistics, in season 1, when they weren't aware of the death risk, 255 players were eliminated, which left 201 that survived after the first game. Meanwhile, when it came to this playthrough, 91 players died, which left 365 survivors, which obviously increased the number of survivors by over 100. So obviously the warning helped. People took more caution and it was more survivable. And honestly, even in the first game, I don't think the lack of survival was even from, I think if they knew they were gonna die, obviously it would have been more survivable, but they didn't, so they all panicked and got eliminated. Oh, I don't know if I clarified, but the Victorious characters I'm going to be using are the main friend group, Tori, Jade, Beck, Robbie, Andre, and Kat, and then also Sinjin and Trina are in this. So I think the whole squad would easily survive this game, assuming it assuming it would follow the same rules as season 2, they have Gihan to warn them of the death risk. I think they would all have an extra level of caution and they would easily survive this. I did originally contemplate the idea that Robbie would die during this round because he does have a habit of being clumsy, but I do think that with the added knowledge of what's going to happen, he could have easily survived, especially, you know, when they all started like getting behind taller people and stuff. He could have easily ducked behind Andre or Beck or even one of the girls and he could have survived this. Robbie isn't that dumb, you know. I think he would have been careful and I think he would have followed through, and I don't think anyone else in this would have had any particular struggles either. So now that all the players have either been eliminated or completed the first game, they have a better understanding of what the game actually entails, and they have the opportunity to vote for the first time on whether or not they want to continue playing. And the stakes are different this time because when it was the first games, if they chose to leave the game, if the majority voted to leave the game, they could leave. But then the prize money that had been accumulated was going to be donated to the families of those who were eliminated. But this time around, they find out that the prize money would be distributed between the remaining players. So nobody would leave entirely empty-handed. However, a key point of Squid Game is these people aren't rich. They're not doing the greatest in their lives. Like, they're not playing these games just for the fun of it and for the enjoyment of it and for the bonding experience that it creates. They all have massive debts that they need to pay off, and for a lot of them, their debts are higher than the amount that they would get if the prize money was distributed between everybody, and they could barely begin to pay off their debts with the sum that was accumulated just from the first game. And a lot of these people are at such a level of desperation, they feel like they're going to die anyways. Like, if they go back out into the regular world after this game, they're just going to die and life's not going to be fun for them anyways. So they figure they might as well try, right? They might as well play this game, and if they die, they die. And if they survive, then they get that money. So I understand that. That's literally the whole point of the games. It, in a way, manipulates these people into believing they have no choice. And of course, the system is rigged, so they're going to keep playing regardless if they really want to or not. Still, even taking the desperation into account, I do think that Tori would want to stop here, and she would be trying to get everyone in the friend group to stop here as well. I think she would be the first one who wouldn't be able to see the money as anything other than blood money, and obviously when she realizes the risk, she just wouldn't think it was worth it, and she'd kind of give her like Tori TED talk to the group, trying to convince them to stop playing. I also think that Andre would agree to stop playing. I think he'd be a little hesitant about it, but Tori would ultimately remind him of his family and what's going on outside of the games, and he would agree to stop. As for the rest of them, I honestly think that they would want to keep playing because, once again, this is a time of desperation, and I feel like after surviving the first game, they would feel like, oh, it's just children's games, you know, now that we know what's going to happen if we get eliminated, we can easily survive them. And so I think the ideology of just playing one more game wouldn't be like bad to them. They'd think that they could easily survive it, there's no real harm in it, and they'll just be extra careful and they'll get through, earn a little more money, and then leave the game. That would be true for at least Jade and Beck. I think Kat would simply keep playing because she thinks it's fun and she's a little unaware of the situation around her. She doesn't fully grasp that people are actually dying, and so she'd just have fun with the game. She'd want to keep playing, and then she'd see Jade and Beck keep playing and she'd want to play. I think Sinjin would be in a similar boat. He doesn't care. He's just here for fun. He thinks it's enjoyable, so he's gonna keep playing because it's fun to him. And as for Robbie, I think he would be hesitant to keep playing, but he would because he'd feel pressure from people around him. Kind of like the character of Minsu. I feel like people around him would be like, come on, buddy, just play one more game. Just play one more game. We'll protect you if you vote to keep playing one more game. And so with the added protection of his so-called alliances, he would agree to keep playing. Especially when he realizes that people pretend to like him when he keeps playing. The likability and the false protection that he thinks he's going to get would encourage him to keep playing. I know the stakes are different here because of what elimination entails, but it's clear that Robbie does have a certain want for validation and popularity, and even in the Robberazzi episodes, we can see how quickly he was willing to like mock his friends and leave them when he got a little touch of fame, and he really only stopped the whole Robberazzi thing when the cards were turned against him and he was humiliated. So I think with the promise of a little bit of popularity amongst the players, he'd be like, yeah, one more game, we're gonna keep going. He would also hear the voices of Rex in his mind being like, you're a wimp, keep playing. And obviously Rex wouldn't be there because he's a puppet, but I think he'd still hear that voice in his head being like, keep playing, man, and he would keep playing. Ultimately, though, we already know the decision that was made, and that was that everybody has to keep playing. Especially now that they have a survivor of the games, they feel like he can easily tell them what's to come and they can get through it. However, a lot of them regret this decision when they realize that they don't actually know the next game and that the games were changed up, and instead of playing the honeycomb challenge, they are stuck doing a pentathlon, which is probably a bit more difficult because it not only requires like personal skill like yourself, but it also requires trust and skill in the people that you team up with. If you get 4 players who suck at what they do, your life is going to end. Also, in the Victorious character circumstances, there are 8 of them and the teams are in 5, which means that 3 people have to be left out of the initial team, which creates a little bit of a challenge for them. And it left me thinking, who would be kicked out? My initial thoughts were Trina, Robbie, and Sinjin. Robbie simply because he is admittedly kind of clumsy and he does have a habit of ruining things for everybody around him with his sort of unawareness and clumsiness. And he's not exactly known for being super strong either, so I feel like he'd be seen as one of the weaker links and someone who probably shouldn't play, especially when they don't know what the game they're going to be playing is. I feel like Sinjin probably would have already found other alliances in people who want to keep playing the game or enjoy it, and so I don't think he'd be personally offended if he wasn't included with the main group. I think he would have easily found some other people because he'd simply just enjoy it, and so that he'd kind of stray away from the group a little bit there. And as for Trina, I was torn on this because I do think the group would see her as a weak link since she doesn't have anything that they consider really a good talent. You know, she is a woman. They might think they need a man for strength, and she kind of irritates them, but I also don't think they would easily want her to just die. I mean, I don't think they'd want anyone to just die, but thinking strategically, you know, they have to pick the people that they think would benefit themselves the most. I do think Tori would carry too much guilt, just like excluding Trina from their team though, because they are sisters and she obviously does care about her. So I was really left contemplating everything, and I ultimately decided I think Kat, Jade, and Beck would definitely remain as a team. Jade and Beck because obviously they're together, and Kat would probably just stick with Jade because it's a safe option, and Jade and Beck do obviously care about Kat as well. I do think that initially Tori and Andre would have been the other candidates for their team, but I think Tori would have insisted on teaming up with Trina because she didn't want to leave her behind, and I feel like Andre would kind of group with Tori, and so then they would have Jade, Beck, and Kat on a team, and then whoever else they manage to find. I feel like Beck would probably find some people he thinks are strong and worthy of being on the team. And then Tori, Andre, and Trina would be on a team. They'd find 2 other people, and I feel like they wouldn't necessarily find people who are incredibly strong, but they wouldn't find like bad players, you know what I mean? Like they'd be players that not necessarily everyone else would want to pick, but also not bad players. I think Robbie would end up joining the team of somebody who, you know, promised him protection. If he agreed to play one more game, they'd feel obligated to let him on their team, and I feel like he'd honestly end up in an all-guys team of relatively strong players simply because he, you know, joined their side and voted to stay. And like I said, Sinjin is just off on a random team somewhere having the time of his life. As for what they play, there are 5 games in the pentathlon, and it was really hard to pick what I think each person would play. I think I figured it out somewhat. I think Kat could easily succeed at any and all of these games, but because of the other players on her team and what I think they'd be better at, I think she'd do really well at the first game, the paper tossing game, Dachki. I really apologize if I mispronounce any of these terms. I did look up pronunciations in an attempt to not butcher them, but it admittedly is a struggle area for me. I really do think Kat would do well with this game though, because she has shown talent in a lot of areas. She designs costumes and makes costumes, which I think obviously requires a certain level of precision. And even in scenes where we see her coloring or something, it's always like neatly in the lines and good. So I think she has that precision, and I think somehow Kat would just know the right way to throw the cards or whatever to get it to flip in one of her first tries, and I think it'd be a cakewalk for her. I'm not sure why, but Beck gives me the vibes that he'd be good at the spinning top game. That was just my initial thought, I don't know. And Jade, I probably would go with the flying stones because she has a habit of throwing things, and so I think she could just knock it out. And I think their whole team would survive and even have a few seconds left to spare. As for Tori, Andre, and Trina, I know that the majority of the group seems to think that Trina has no talent, but that's actually not true. Trina is actually very skilled in martial arts, which we see periodically throughout the show, and that in a way is the real reason why she's at Hollywood Arts, at least indirectly. And I honestly think she'd really do good at Jeji, the game at the end where they kick the thing up. I think that ability would really help her with this game, and I don't think that's too hard of a task for Trina. I think she could easily keep it in the air 5 times. I think Andre would probably just pick something that he felt like he could do well enough, and I think the flying stones would be a good game for him. I don't know. And Tori, I could honestly see being really good at Gongi. We see at her house, the group is always playing like little card games or little games like that, and I could honestly see her playing this game or a similar game with Trina in her childhood and be experienced at it and know how to play it really well. So I think that would be what she did, and once again I think this team would survive through. And for whatever team Robbie is on, I have no doubt that he would be playing Gongi, and he'd be unaware of the fact that it's usually associated as a feminine game, and he would absolutely crush it. Let's be honest, he'd play the game blissfully unaware of what it's meant for, and he would save his team because of it, because they're all like more macho men. They don't know how to play that game. And then Robbie comes along and he does know how to play the game. That is what I believe. As for Sinjin, I honestly don't know what he'd play. I feel like he'd pick the weirdest game possible. I could see him maybe doing the card flip game at the beginning because he is smart, so I feel like he might know the science behind getting it right. However, not everybody can survive, and I do think that this is where Sinjin would meet his end, not necessarily at the fault directly of his own, but I think he'd just end up on a team that wasn't strong enough to survive through the games. I do think Robbie would, because like I said, he'd end up on a team who promised to protect him if he voted to keep playing, but Sinjin wouldn't necessarily be in that boat, and so I think this would be where he gets eliminated. 1 player of the group down, 7 left, and now we're back to the second vote of the games, and I think the majority of them would vote to leave now, especially seeing the results of what happened. They realize that the game might be a little harder than they had first thought, and they really don't know what they're playing, so they have to be more careful, and I think that they decided they could just pull together and stop the games. I do think the outlier here would be Robbie, who once again would keep playing simply because of the promise of protection and the pressure of the people around him telling him just one more game, just one more game, just one more game, so he would continue playing on. Of course, once again, the people who want to quit the game are outvoted, and they're forced to continue on to the next game, which is called Mingle. This game is really tricky because you either have to be liked, lucky, or just willing to kill the people around you, willing to fight and do whatever it takes. If I was in the Squid Game, this is definitely where I would die if I didn't die in the first game, or in the Pentathlon game. Following the same numbers as those in the show, they have to form into groups of 10, 4, 3, 6, and 2. When it's 10, I do believe that the group would just simply stick together and then find the other people needed to make up a team. And, you know, teams of 10 is easier because there's a lot of people there, and so I feel like getting into the groups would be much easier here, and the group would have no problem literally sticking together and grabbing a couple more people as they go to a room. When 4 is called, I do think it'd be more stressful, but I think that they would all still survive through it because there is more of them than people who need to go in a room. I think 4 of them could easily team up, and then the other 3 could just grab somebody who needs a team and they'd all be just fine. Then 3 is called, and naturally that's a little bit harder, especially because there is 7 of them. People are afraid and desperate at this point. They're shoving people out of rooms, fighting their way to get into rooms, shoving people, you know, doing whatever it takes to get the best chance at survival. They'll exclude people from their teams, they'll betray each other, they don't care. The stakes are very high. I had to remind myself, this is probably where someone else would get eliminated. It is hard because I love the characters of this show and I don't want to be like, yeah, they die. But realistically, that's what the show is all about and someone would have to. And unfortunately, I think Robbie would be the next one to go. I don't think the group would purposefully like betray him and purposely be like, okay, Robbie, we're leaving you out to die. But I do think that in the pressure of finding somewhere, he would end up being left and he wouldn't be able to find a team. The alliances that he had formed would betray him at this point and he'd be left for dead. I also do think that the group would be more split up at this point, and I don't think they'd all like try and form a group together. I think they'd kind of just go wherever they could and hope for everybody else's survival. Now the number is 6, and there's 6 of them, so the easiest answer would obviously be, oh, the 6 of them pair up. But I don't think that's realistic. Not everybody gets what they want in playing this game, and they're all so split up, I don't think they'd all easily be able to grab each other. I think a couple of them would be in the same room, but it's not realistic to assume that all of them would be in the same. And so I do think that this would be the round where Trina goes. Once again, I don't think it'd be deliberate by any of the group, but I think she would just simply struggle to find a team and the other ruthless players wouldn't necessarily like think her to be the best or most worthy of survival, so she would be left behind and ultimately eliminated. I think the others would survive simply because they're either strong enough or liked enough to get a team. Like, I think people like Tori enough, she'd be able to get a group somewhere. Same with Andre, and he's also stronger. I feel like if push came to shove, he would shove someone and survive. Jade, I think, would find ways of survival. Cat just survives because that's who Cat is. And lastly, 2 is called, and once again, I think they managed to just find ways to survive. It's a lot harder, but I think that they could do it. And that is where the games have concluded for this season of Squid Game, because that's obviously when they tried to fight and get the fuck out of there because enough people have died, they're done. But I'm not really going to be covering the whole fight sequence. I honestly don't know if any of them would necessarily join the fight itself, but assuming there would be a vote, I obviously think that they would all vote to leave the game, because why would they want to keep playing after they lost so many of their friends, you know? So that is where this video is going to end. Of course, these are just my opinions on how I think the characters would do in Squid Game. Some people might feel very differently, but just based on how much I've watched the show and how I've seen them behave on the show, this is where I think that they would, you know, how I think they do in Squid Game. But you guys can let me know what you think, how you think they do, and who do you think the final winner of Squid Game would be? I know it's hard because we haven't seen the next games or whatever comes next. Do you think Cat would survive this? I know I said in the first one Cat would be the winner just because she's Cat, but I don't know. Do you think she'd pull through this time? What do we think? So that is going to be all for this video though, and I will see y'all in my next. Peace out.